Hello everyone, this is Jackie. This time, let's watch a movie about a scum man framing his wife, double jeopardy. Libby was a young mother. She had a good relationship with her husband, Nick, and they had a son who was smart and cute. The happy life of her family envied others. Libby loved smiling, though Nick wasn't interested. That day he borrowed a sailboat from his friend. Libby and Nick were going to have their own happy world at the weekend. Libby was worried that her son wouldn't be taken care of. Angela, her best friend, offered to take care of her son. Libby and Nick sailed out for a good night over the weekend. Libby woke up in the cabin in the morning and found that Nick was missing. Her hands and body were covered with blood. She cried out in horror. While following the bloodstain to the deck, she saw a bloody knife. No sooner had Libby picked up the knife than the Coast Guard sailed in. After searching, Nick's body was not found. But judging from the scene, Nick's chance of survival was small. Libby couldn't accept Nick's death. And what she never thought of was the prosecutor charged her with murder. The judge refused her bail. In court, the Navy officer proved that they rushed to the scene after receiving a distress message from Nick through the ocean radio. At that time, they saw Libby holding the knife, and her body was covered with bloodstains. The prosecutor played Nick's call for help in court. Although Nick didn't say who the killer was, he and Libby were the only people on board. The identity of the killer was self-evident. According to the investigation, Nick bought $2 million of life insurance 4 months ago, and the beneficiary was Libby. This was clear motive for killing. Now all the evidence pointed to Libby, and there was nothing the lawyer could do. Finally, Libby was convinced and sentenced to prison. She asked Angela to adopt her son. To thank her best friend, she would put $2 million of insurance money in the trust fund under her son's name as the son's support. Libby was grief over her husband's loss and her guilt. Her son was the only hope that kept her going. Every month, she was really happy to see her son once. But the next month, Angela didn't take her son to meet Libby. Angela suddenly disappeared, and Libby couldn't get in touch with her. Under the guidance of her inmates, Libby thought that Angela had left son in kindergarten. So she called the school in the name of Angela and lied that she had not received the check of the severance payment. The school checked her new address and phone number. So Libby knew Angela's new address and phone number. Unexpectedly, Angela had moved to San Francisco. She was very surprised to get a call from Libby. Having to answer Libby's questions, she quickly pacified Libby and promised to take the son to meet Libby next week. Libby was relieved when she heard her son's voice. But then she heard her son call Dad. Turned out that Nick was not dead, but also lived with Angela. Nick quickly dropped the phone when he knew it was Libby. Libby tried to call again, and the phone couldn't get through. At this time, she realized that everything was the plan of her husband and best friend. After calming down, Libby called the insurance company and said Nick was still alive, asked them to send investigators to San Francisco. But who would believe what a murderer said? Libby knew the truth and she was ready to appeal. But the former lawyer told her, appeal in prison was not only too long, but also almost impossible to succeed. What Libby had to do now was to serve a good prisoner and get revenge on that man. Because there was no second trial for one crime in the United States, Libby was convicted of murder. Even if Libby was released and killed her husband, she wouldn't be convicted. From then on, Libby turned grief and anger to strength. What supported her persistence was not only the missing of her son, but also the hatred of her husband. 6 years later, Libby was released on parole for good behavior. But for the next 3 years, she had to live in a halfway house, and complied with all the rules of parole. With any violation, she would be sent back to prison for further sentence. After coming out, Libby ran to the library the first time. She was going to find Angela's information through the Ministry of Education's teacher certification information, but thousands of search results were too hard to find. So Libby went straight to the kindergarten where Angela worked. Although she had known the principal before, the situation changed, and the principal refused to tell Angela's information. The helpless Libby waited until the evening to sneak into the school office to find Angela's social security number. Because Libby broke the glass, the police on patrol were attracted. Libby ran away but was still caught by the police. Libby's parole officer, Lehman, came to pick her up. On the ferry, Lehman handcuffed Libby to the outside handle of the car door. Libby didn't want to go back to prison again. She started her car and tried to break the door handle and escape. In the upper cabin of the man found Libby's intention to escape and ran down in a hurry. He smashed the window, opened the door and tried to control the car. Libby rushed into the river with the car. Under the water, Lehman opened Libby's handcuffs. Libby escaped and snatched the pistol that Lehman had fallen into the car. Lehman rushed to catch up with Libby, but when he got on boat, he was out of strength in the water. Not only did Libby hurt his head, but he let Libby escape. Libby took a ride back to her parents' house. Her mother gave her cash and she began to look for Angela. Libby came to the car sales center and wanted to borrow money to buy a car in the name of Angela. When the salesperson inquired the credit limit through Angela's social security number, Libby got Angela's latest address. She pressed the gun in her pocket and rang the doorbell. But the person who opened the door was not Angela. Libby heard from the next door neighbor that 4 years ago Angela died because of a gas explosion. But her son was fine. Libby came to the library and found the newspaper about Angela's death. Lehman knew that Libby had fled in search of her son, so he found Angela's address, but it was a little late and Libby had just left. But Lehman learned from the neighbor about the model of the truck Libby was driving. Libby was getting lost in search of her son. Suddenly a clue was found in Angela's picture in the newspaper. She recognized that the famous picture on the wall in the background of the picture was the one Nick had collected, so Libby came to the gallery. On the art drawing website, she found that the painting was sold to a museum in Munich 6 months ago, but the person who sold the painting was a man named Jonathan. At this time, Lehman tracked down here and saw the truck in front of the gallery, and the one the neighbor told me were the same model. Them came in and asked. Libby in the inner room heard that Lehman had found her and ran away from the window. Before leaving, she didn't forget to hit the Lehman's car. Lehman watched Libby escape this time. Libby came to New Orleans and found out that Jonathan's address was a hotel. She knew that Jonathan would attend the fundraising auction in the evening. Then in the evening, Libby dressed and mixed into the venue. Libby's intuition was not wrong, Jonathan was her ex-husband. Now Nick was more than just a businessman. He had also been favored by many women. Nick was shocked to see Libby, but Libby didn't expose Nick's identity on the spot. She asked Nick to give up her son, or she would destroy what Nick had now. Nick brazenly argued. He pretended to be dead to leave a sum of insurance money for Libby and his son. But he didn't think the police would really convict Libby. After all, Libby wouldn't believe Nick's lies anymore. And she didn't believe Angela died in an accident. At that time, according to the clues, Lehman also came to the venue. Libby saw Lehman and left in a hurry. Lehman found Nick, but Nick denied seeing Libby. The next day, Libby asked Nick to meet her son at a cemetery. Nick arrived at the appointed time on time. But the son stood in the distance, saw Libby and walked away quickly. After a few turns, Libby chased TP a remote place and was shocked out by Nick, who suddenly appeared. Turned out that the little boy Libby saw was just a bait paid by Nick. When Libby woke up and found herself locked in a coffin. Fortunately, the gun she was carrying was still there, and Libby shot through the coffin and escaped. She went to Nick's house with hatred. But on the way, she was caught by Lehman, and Libby cried bitterly. In the evening, Lehman found Nick again. He found out through investigation that what Libby said was true. Nick was not surprised to see his real identity discovered. He offered $1 million to make Lehman keep silent. Lehman actually agreed, but he was worried that Libby would make trouble for them. Nick said confidently that he had solved Libby. Then Libby just came in with the gun. Because of the gun, Nick had to tell his son's school. Turned out that in the process of chasing Libby, Lehman found that Libby was indeed wrong, so he pretended to accept bribes and he secretly tape records Nick's remarks implying he murdered Libby. Then Libby was going to pay him back in his own way, fake Libby's death scene and recorded evidence to charge Nick with murder. Nick jumped off the wall, suddenly took out his gun and hit Lehman in the shoulder. Nick was ready to shoot at Libby and was pushed away by Lehman. Libby quickly picked up the gun and killed Nick. The truth was revealed. Nick's insatiable greed finally paid off. Libby, with a strong faith and great love, finally was reunited with her son. Okay, this is the end of this movie. Don't forget to like my video. Thank you for watching. See you next time.